So now for our first panel, what's work got to do with it? For me, this is where the conversation all began. I was talking with the Emmy-nominated artist Molly Crabapple, our first presenter, about illustration and artificial intelligence last year. It came up because we had been asked to speak at the International Journalism Festival about her career, which is as storied as it gets. She's written and illustrated for the New York Times, New York Review of Books, Vanity Fair, and so many more. She told me about the time she took a whirl on Dali, typed in Syrian city, destroyed by war, drawn by Molly Crabapple. All of a sudden, drawings popped up that looked like crappy, half-baked versions of her work. Seeing these images prompted a cascade of protests. She wrote an op-ed in the LA Times calling AI vampirized technology. And together, we drafted and distributed a letter calling for newsrooms to restrict AI illustration so that illustrators and graphic designers wouldn't find themselves without a job. What this tech means to her, her work, and her future is why she's here today. Joining her is the writer Brian Merchant, who has written for Wired, The Atlantic, Harper's, The Guardian, and more. His newest book, Blood in the Machine, The Origins of the Rebellion Against Big Tech, was on many Best Book of the Year lists. It covers the Luddite uprising in rural England 200 years ago, and it explains the power, threat, and toll of big tech and AI today. His book is a reminder that the struggle against big tech is bound up in the struggle for human rights. Moderating and also presenting is Eric Telford. He's the head of illustration here at RISD. Eric has lectured throughout the United States and internationally in Zimbabwe, where he was a Visual Arts Initiative Artist in Residence. In 2019, he received a Robert and Margaret McCall Johnson Fellowship to explore creativity in poverty and pursue a personal, independent visual novel. As department head, Eric has a front row seat to ways in which generative technology is transforming art and design, education, and employment.
So I guess I can start first with reactions after hearing each of us sort of express our thoughts and on AI.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll just say something quick and then throw it to Molly just to respond to the last sort of concluding remark you made, because I do think that there's a lot there. It's very thorny, but I do just think we have to be very careful. Which, first of all, thank you for your presentation. A lot of great stuff in there, and interesting to hear it from a practitioner in academia, and also thinking about education and how you're trying to navigate these waters. And I've been talking to a lot of universities, and it's especially we've been talking about art and art production, but education is the other one that's just. Their noses are so far in it for a range of reasons, from plagiarized homework and things like that to ethics of teaching it as well. But I would also caution on two fronts this conclusion that you're right, we have to be aware of it. I mean, I think there's no choice but to address it one way or the other, whether it's to resist it or to try to embrace it, and I would contest the suggestion that anyone here should feel like that they need to learn how to use it to facilitate more production or to think or that this is a skill that they're going to need if they're hoping to be an illustrator or a working artist or somebody that's going to get a job placement afterwards, because I think that just starts to lead us down a path that is potentially deterministic, and there's two reasons. One is that we are still in the middle of the hype cycle of AI, and there's a lot of signs that it may be dying down to some extent, and we may be able to address it and confront what is actually being entailed when we're thinking about using AI in a field like the production of art. But it also it has all of these unresolved issues with copyright, with who gets to use it, with how it's actually going to be used by working artists. So I would be careful also of saying that it can be used for good in some fringe cases, and ask that we look at the full impact right now of agreeing to this contract where we're going to say we're going to consent to using AI in the way that it's being used now. Lewis Mumford has a great phrase, the megatechnic bribe, and that's technologists and corporate technologists and people, industrialists will say like, well, look, it can do this one good thing, or AI can be used to sort of find solutions around like where to point solar panels to optimize for climate. And there may be some use cases that are genuinely good, or you showcase that artist's work who had used AI to showcase people of color in new settings. And these sort of megatechnic bribes, he would argue, are ways to sort of obscure from the bulk of what's actually going on. And I would say that the real threat and what's really going on en masse is that AI is being used across the board to degrade working conditions for artists, to devalue art, so yeah, you may be able to get a job if you're a skilled prompt engineer in addition to illustrating, but is that why you want to be an illustrator? Do you want, there's maybe some interesting mixed media uses, but AI as it stands, as Molly said, is this conglomeration of work that's been vacuumed up without consent, is being used to profit a handful of small people within very large companies, again, for profit at your expense. So I do think whether we resist that outright, which is what my recommendation would be, or to navigate those waters, either way, we have to be aware of the actual state of play, which is that these companies are using AI for a specific purpose, and that is to create cheap work that you will then not be able to do as an illustrator. Yeah.
Can I respond quickly? I wanted to mention that I'm very conflicted with generative AI. However, as an administrator in my department, I have students who contact me within the institution itself and from outside the institution wanting to apply to RISD. And so I'm a very matter-of-fact individual. Personally, I think that I'm very concerned and worried about the rate at which people are adopting generative AI and using the software. I think there's some study done that it took Facebook a couple of years for an adoption of like 100,000, and I think AI, it was like less than double that, right? So I think that people are adopting it, and they're doing so at the mercy of some of the environmental concerns that we all sort of have observed and seen. I think there's Microsoft's data center in Arizona is basically drying up the area there. Their water consumption spiked like 34% between 2022 and 2023. AI in order to generate these images and to cool down these mega centers, you need tons of water, right? And so I do think that AI is an environmental threat as well. However, there are some harsh realities, and that is students applying to RISD are looking to get jobs. And if you're going to be, and this is not something I agree with, however, I am aware that in order to be to be competitive in those industries, you don't have to use it in your work, but you do have to be aware of it and actually know how to use it just to make yourself valuable in certain spaces. And I think there's a certain unique cases. I don't think it's all of illustration. I don't want to paint a broad brush around illustration. It just meant for those particular industries.
So I want to, is this on? Okay, now it's on, all right. First of all, I just wanted to say that I really appreciated the data that you brought to that, which I think is something that is not, like, data just isn't used enough when we're speaking to art students. So I just wanted to thank you for the rigor of it. And also I wanted to thank you for bringing up the environmental impact, which ultimately, I don't even want to say threat or impact. How about this? For AI to be adopted at the scale, generative AI to be adopted at the scale that these people want, it means the end of life on Earth. So that literally, it means using up all of our potable water. So that's just before I even get into artists and creativity and soul, we are literally talking about using up all our potable water for this. And if people think that it's worth it for that, they're crazy. The second thing that I want to talk about is about what you were saying about needing to integrate AI into your process. You don't need to pay $30,000 a year to know how to do prompts. If that's what you want to do, don't go to art school, man. Like, you truly don't. The skills that you're taught here are skills that it is the goal of these companies to destroy the use of. When we say integrating it into our process, what that actually looks like for these corporate bosses is taking you, a painter, taking you, someone who's building worlds, and reducing you to someone who photoshops out the sixth finger. It is taking away you as an imaginative creature and turning you into someone that corrects the slop put out by the generators until the generators are good enough not to make six fingers anymore. It's actually an existential threat. And I appreciate you speaking about the industries out west, right? Like the gaming and film. This is why labor organizing is so important. These industries should be unionized. When the Screen Actors Guild was faced with the threat of having studio executives use ChatGPT to churn out scripts for them that they couldn't get residuals on and they wouldn't have the copyright for, they weren't like, that's the future, gotta be competitive. They were like, we're going on fucking strike. And the fact that artists are a bunch of stray cats running in a bunch of different directions and are not unionized is why we have made such incredibly easy pickings for these vampires.
Yeah, I'll just add, in the context of sort of a workplace where one avenue I might imagine sort of art or illustration students or design students ending up in some of these in corporate departments, even like the good ones in, say, entertainment or game design. I am talking to people who are working for these fields right now who have seen half of their departments been laid off with an express directive to get to know how to use Midjourney. Instead of designing a character or an asset or something themselves, they're saying, okay, well, now you have to basically multiply your output. So this is how the tool is used on the ground. I mean, for those of us who are not, practicing artists or working artists, as a tool, and most of the art that you see on the internet is produced by people who are not working artists. It's a new toy that they're able to enter prompts into and get some output. But for working artists, this is how it is intersecting with their lives right now. And I wish I could convey to people, just when I do get somebody on the phone, which it takes great bravery in another non-unionized field like gaming. A lot of game development is not unionized, and it takes great courage to talk to the press about these things. But people are terrified because they've already seen within 1 year with these directives to use these tools and the rise of sort of the normalization in the corporate environment of using them, whether or not that they're deemed legal or yet. There was a few months where it was like, maybe we shouldn't use these things, but some companies are just going ahead because, again, it's about productivity. It's about creating more product. It's not about how does it enhance creativity. Maybe is there a way to augment this or do cool stuff with it? No, when you get in the trenches and you're working in an artistic field, the directive is going to be produce 6 times as much. Make more stuff because we don't want to pay as many people on your team or in your department to do it.
So, okay. I just wanted to offer one more observation I've seen, and that is the problem with the layoffs, specifically layoffs happening in entertainment right now, is I think, one of the main issues is overhiring. And so based on a production schedule, sometimes whoever is the art director, the project manager will overhire artists, and by the end of that production, you realize that you didn't need as many artists, and so artists are let go. I think that is sometimes being conflated with the impact of AI. Now, I do have friends who, I have messages that I can actually read verbatim about their fear of getting jobs because of AI. And when I made that statement earlier, I don't think that every artist should integrate AI into their practice. I want to make that clear. What I am saying is that there are certain industries, based on the graphs that I showed, that show that artists who understand using generative AI are looked at as more competitive in those particular fields. So understanding its uses would help you rather than not in terms of getting a job.
Yeah, just say real quickly that I think that the biggest reason for that, again, from like a corporate employer's eyes, a big Hollywood movie studio or a big game developer company or something that's going to want that sort of is the ways that it allows you to increase productivity. I think that's what they're looking at. That's why it's competitive, not because you're going to be able to create images that more align with sort of the future or they're more creative or anything. It's just if you know how to do that and you're comfortable with doing it, you can churn out more stuff.
And also another purpose of it is to discipline labor. So one of the things that capital always tries to do, right, is it tries to reduce the power of any individual worker by making what they do less unique. So if you are, let's say you're a woodworker and you're like the only person that can carve those florets or whatever, you have a lot more power over your labor conditions, over what price you can set, than if you're someone working in a factory pushing a button that injects stuff into a mold to make those florets and also makes a bajillion times more florets. So you need a bajillion less people, workers involved. What AI does, it's not that it produces great work. It doesn't produce great work. We all know that. It produces crap work. But what it does is it provides these bosses the ability to threaten you, to say, you're not so special. We don't need you to make these great paintings. We don't need you to write The Sopranos. We can just do it ourselves. You're interchangeable. It makes workers scared. It makes them less able to argue for their own labor conditions. And ultimately, its goal is to make them interchangeable. A prompt engineer, I hate that word, someone who types things into a box, is not the same as someone who paints like the wind, like this guy, It's just not the same. And people who can do things that are individual will always have more power than someone who just does an interchangeable skill.
Questions? Sorry.
Right here.
Mic check. Hi. Just for context, I'm a creative technologist and an AI art practitioner. There's a lot of things that I would love to say, but there's one thing in particular I think I would be curious what you all have an opinion on, which is from the other side of there's, at least I see this a lot in the fine arts as it relates to creative technology, is this practice of named artists hiring a lot of technologists and completely wiping their name off the project, right? Like there's this thing where established artists are the ones with the funding to create the big pieces, to hire the army of painters that will do the murals or things like that. And I'm curious how you feel about AI empowering like a new batch of artists who have now capabilities to make large, impactful work without having to, abuse a sea of workers or find like hundreds of thousands of dollars in funding to do that.
This is a really good question. And first of all, I hate and hold in contempt those artists that do that. This has been a problem with the fine art world. It's not really a thing in the illustration world because we just don't make enough money, to do that. But in the fine art world, you have people like the Jeff Koons of the world that don't do a damn thing. They're basically just a CEO signing their names to the work of more talented people who don't have their resources. I hate them. If I had my way, none of those people would be allowed to call themselves painters or sculptors. At best, they could call themselves a CEO, and they can have a list of credits like you do at the end of a movie. I also don't think you should be able to, like, I don't know, Photoshop your head onto a ballerina's body and say that you know, dance Swan Lake. It's insane. The people who are actually painting the art are the painters. So yeah, I applaud you, and I think that that really does show the hypocrisy. The thing with AI work, though, is that a lot of AI actually can't empower people to do that sort of large-scale work, and the reason that I say that is that the large-scale work is physical, right? Like, when you have Jeff Koons doing those, you know, gigantic sculptures, right? Or when you have what's that guy, not Kostabi, the other one. You know, the guy who paints the little dots. You know, when you have studios painting the little dots, it's not just that there's a JPEG of the dots, right? It's that there's a big ass fucking painting that's huge on the wall. AI doesn't, it's not hands, right? It's not actually painting physical canvases or sculpting or any of that. It's just, at this point, the generators are making JPEGs. So the people are still as disempowered as they ever were. It just basically just points out the hypocrisy of a bunch of these fancy pants fine artists that were stealing the credit of more talented people.
Yeah, and I would add, and it's a great question, it really is, but if you consider, again, is AI actually going to challenge those sort of power relationships that is going to allow more people to create those scale of works, or is everybody just going to sort of be able to sort of produce some simulacra now, and then that kind of almost immediately reduces like the scarcity and the power that you might have over you know, a unique work. If everybody, I always encourage people to just know that everybody else has access to this too. So if it's democratizing something to the point that there's little differentiation, and I'm not saying that there isn't, and there is still interesting AI art. That's the other thing that I want to say, is that Molly and I are mostly talking about the LLMs that are used by the big tech companies today for this specific purpose. Creative technologists are amazing. You guys do amazing work and create amazing art, and there's all kinds of great stuff to do. But as long as you're using these tools that are charging whatever, a $20 monthly fee that goes right into the pockets of one of the giant tech giants or a company that's affiliated directly with it, then ultimately they are going to maintain control. They are going to be the ones who ultimately get that data, for one thing, that you're submitting into it by using it, and then continuing to consolidate power, and then they're going to be the ones that, I mean, right now, this is the best that it's ever going to be. The conditions of using these tools are within their hands, and the power is going to continue to concentrate, you know, unless we get more open. But we could go down a lot of paths. But the way that things are going right now, power is concentrating into fewer hands. A few companies are setting the rules and the guidelines for how these tools are going to be used, and they're going to be the ones that benefit, not artists, not us.
Eric, if you had a response.
No. Next question. I have a response, but I want to make sure that we get.
Well, one of
more
our
people.
agents was up on top of Wildcat Mountain. Oh, cool. They were up there for it.
Was that Kevin?
No, Austin.
Oh, I figured. That makes sense.
Cool.
One of the
It was
two.
once in a
So,
lifetime.
I'm actually like
Was
at this
there a lot of
because I
people
do
who
want to
were
pursue
No, we were in the
job
middle of a
design
cornfield.
and
Fast forward to
stuff
an
where it
awesome.
showed. That might be one of the jobs that will be most affected by AI. And I was actually considering this because you showed that example of the Killmonger cut. I'm a big fan of most of those things that you showed, but I feel like there's something that's being overlooked when you make that statement about like humans creating characters. And that is the capitalist take that people want more of the same. At the end of the day, those are big companies. Like Overwatch, Valorant, those are created by big companies, and they still have control of character design. And what AI does is it takes a average of these characters. So isn't there like some sort of consequence of implementing this sort of average and creating characters of color, characters that are marginalized, to be sort of a stereotype of the same thing over and over again? I feel like this is something that just isn't being discussed as much, the averaging of art.
so there is a consequences, and I want to echo all of your statements. I think they're very valid. In terms of game design, yes, most gaming companies currently are quite conservative in their conceptual approach to certain products. In fact, what you'll find is for every creatively limited Overwatch character or IP, you'll find something like a Scavenger's Reign, right? That decides to create a unique property, right? That then becomes the model that again everyone becomes a simulacra of that particular product. Even a few years ago with Spider-Verse, before Spider-Verse became what it was, again, it took a fine artist to create that particular style and look that then became the sort of foundation for more experimentation in products. So I think it's economically driven, but there's two halves of it. There are some companies that are willing to go out on a limb and create new IPs and products, and then you'll always have those companies also who have margins that they have to make sure that they're keeping track of, as well as investors that they have to keep happy. So I think there's always going to be that tension. With AI, I do find that there's becoming a homogenization of style that I think is going to eventually, I feel more optimistic. I think at some point the market is going to correct itself. There's going to be quite a distance between a really fine arts trained artist who can use these technologies to create new possibilities that are undeniably transformative versus the sort of, everyone who basically plays basketball at the Y, right? Comparing them to someone who plays in the NBA. I do think the cream will rise to the top as they understand the advantages of these programs. Now, I personally have, again, ethical concerns and environmental concerns about what AI is doing. All it takes is for you to travel to one of these remote areas or cities or communities that are near these data centers to really get a sense of how the people who live, within, I guess, the circumference of these big tech companies to really understand how they're being affected by it, right? We're sort of removed from it to some degree on the East Coast, so we don't really see it. But if you travel out west, you'll see that or even around the world, as Molly was talking about, it does affect people. And so I wrestle with it, I wrestle with it. And also being an administrator, knowing that students are going to school, leaving school with an average of a couple $100,000 in debt, there is this, there's this compromise. It's almost like this deal with the devil that we're making by, being involved in this practice.
One thing that
It's working.
Okay. I want to just bring up an amazing concept that Cory Doctorow coined that he's going to be talking about later today, which is in-shedification. So I love this. It's like one of those brilliant words. It sums up something so precisely and so beautifully. Thank you, Cory, for giving us this language. So the thing that I see happening is you're so right about the homogenization and the slop and the cream rising to the top. It's true. However, basically what AI is doing is it's destroying the blue collar level, right? It's destroying the point when you get out of school and you have a job level, or when you're just a regular person, when you're not a rock star. That's what it's taking away. And most people, right, when they're young, I didn't graduate school, I didn't graduate school, but nonetheless, I did not drop out of school to be such a good artist. It's something that I had to do a lot of blue collar work as an artist to get there. I think that what we're going to see is we're going to see a few things that are using good work, a lot of it done by trained artists with hand skills, and then we're just going to have almost everything just be slop, and we're going to have to get used to the slop the same way that we got used to all of our buildings looking like crap, the same way that we got used to our food being Twinkies and filled with toxic hormones. Capitalism makes you get used to lower standard of everything. It is the enshitification of visual culture. So thank you, Cory.
Yes, thanks for that. And I would say, and you can resist, okay? That's the other thing. You can resist. I'm doing a story for Wired right now about all these sort of growing green roots about people who are sort of marking their product, whether they're a tech company or a blogger or an artist with LLM free, right? Like with this, we reject this stuff. There's a badge you can download online. You can stick it on your blog. Dove just came out. So it said we will never use AI generated avatars in our advertising or anything. We'll never use AI for. So there is also sort of this growing sort of rejection of what the fear that AI is doing to not only culture but labor and everything else. So I firmly believe that rejection is an option, at least until these systems are more ethically constituted. We can fight back and ask that they are, and that's what I think it means to be a Luddite in 2024.
I just wanted to. Oh, sorry. I don't want to interrupt the applause, but. I do want to point out that I do think these copyright lawsuits could be a turning point in how AI is adopted in some industries moving forward. There are some, the person who asked the question earlier about the entertainment space, there are many companies that are still reluctant to use AI imagery because they would not be able to, their work would not be protected under copyright. And so there is pushback from some creative managers of sort of outright, accepting and using AI further. So I do think that right now we're sort of in a period where there's a lot of discussion and controversy and conversation, and I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing. As an administrator and as an educator, I do think that it would behoove the collective institution to think about at least understanding it, right? Understanding its use cases so that we can better prepare students to sort of enter the workforce and the workplace. I have many students who reach out to me now, and I ask them about their RISD experience, and they tell me about the things that they wish they had known before going into certain markets. Some of them wanted to go into gaming, for instance, and once they got there, realized this is just not what they wanted to do. They're makers. At the heart of it, they're makers. RISD's bread and butter is concept. We're a thinking school. So for me, I don't think that AI is as much of a threat to the fabric of what we do here institutionally. But I do feel that there are certain cases in which it could help us optimize the technical side of things.
Yeah, and thanks, Eric, for hosting a couple of big tech generative AI abolitionists.
Yeah, thank you so much.
No, you guys are amazing.